And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist John Cowen with your Aviation Outlook. We'll start off taking a look at flying weather across the state for Friday morning. You can see we have plenty of IFR conditions across the southwestern quadrant of the state, including most of the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, and that's going to be mainly due to some low clouds and precipitation moving through. As we have a low pressure system that'll be moving from the southwestern portion of the state into south central and the Gulf of Alaska over the next couple of days, so that's where we're going to be expecting the weather. IFR conditions across the Panhandle as well. Getting into Friday afternoon, we do see some improvement across much of the state. VFR pretty much everywhere except the Alaska range, where we do hang on to some marginal ceilings and some showers across that area. IFR still across the Bering Sea, but as we come over to the Panhandle, we do expect some improvement by Friday afternoon, as we'll have MVFR conditions for about the southern two-thirds of the Panhandle, and Chilkoot and White Passes, some of the higher terrain up here, still hanging on to that IFR for Friday afternoon. Getting into Saturday morning, the IFR weather comes back as our low pressure system moves its way into the Gulf of Alaska, so we'll see the IFR return to the Panhandle, much of the Alaska range, still hanging on to VFR for most of the northern interior, and then across the west coast and the Bering Sea we can expect again IFR conditions. And that pretty much continues through Saturday afternoon, where the IFR continues again across much of the Bering. However, the west coast itself begins to clear out as high pressure begins to take over this area. Beautiful flying weather for most of the state, and then still some IFR conditions across the northern Gulf Coast, but otherwise looking really good flying-wise. Panhandle even starting to clear out for Saturday afternoon. Taking a look at our passes. Again, beautiful flying weather across most of the interior. Anaktuvik looking at VFR weather for Friday. Same story with Adigan passes. Lake Clark and Merrill passes in the Alaska range. We're hanging on to MVFR territory for Friday afternoon. Some IFR weather expected on the western or near the western entrances of the passes, and that's just going to be with the westerly flow. We'll have more of the weather stacked up on that side of the mountains. Rainy Pass, same story, MVFR with the IFR stacked up on the western side. Windy Pass looking at MVFR territory for most of the day Friday. Coming over to Isabel, we'll start off the day in VFR and then trend towards marginal conditions as our low pressure system moves into south central. So worsening conditions for Isabel Pass, looking to keep MVFR for Mentasta Pass for most of the day Friday. Coming down to Tanita Pass, VFR weather for the morning, transitioning towards MVFR in the afternoon, again as that low pressure system moves its way into the area. Portage Pass, looking at MVFR all day with more IFR weather stacked up on the east side of the pass. And then Chilkoot and White Passes, looking at IFR for most of the day Friday. Some improvement towards MVFR is possible later on in the afternoon. And taking a look at our freezing levels, we have freezing levels near the surface where we would expect it over the pack ice, but otherwise freezing levels are generally going to be about 8,000 to 10,000 feet. Over much of the state, up over 12,000 feet as we come southwest towards the Aleutians and the Bering. And as you might expect, our icing levels will be right around or above those levels, so above 8,000 feet for most of the interior, coming up to 10,000 feet and up for the Gulf of Alaska. And then we do have some moisture that's going to be trying to work its way over this Bering Ridge, so some moderate icing is possible over the northern Bering up above 10,000 feet in that area. Looking at our jet stream, we have a pretty strong jet, about 115 knots going across southwestern Alaska there. Winds generally out of the north to northwest, coming down to about 80 knots over Kodiak Island. A stronger core of 70 knot winds as well over the north slope. Coming down to 9,000 feet, about 45 to 50 knots across the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula over Kodiak Island as well. So that's going to be our core of stronger winds. We do have some stronger winds out of the far western Aleutians, about 45 knots or so. Same story as we come down to 3,000 feet, still that stronger core of winds in the western Aleutians, and then about 35 to 40 knots as well over the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. And as you would expect, that is where we will expect to see some turbulence with the winds moving over the terrain there. Surface to about 4,000 feet for some occasional moderate turbulence over that area. And then as we go over the far western Aleutians, again with that stronger core of winds out there, surface to about 3,000 feet is what we'll expect for moderate turbulence in that area. And that'll wrap up our aviation forecast. I'm meteorologist John Cowen.